Hey, what's going on everyone? It's D6, and this might be my most controversial video yet, because today we are talking about the absolute worst quality 4 item in the Binding of Isaac. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, we're talking about Ipecac. Love it or hate it, this is easily one of the most hotly discussed items in the Binding of Isaac, which I don't understand, because it is genuinely horrible. Dog water, horseradish, deplorable, abysmal. I would rather scoop my own eyeballs out with a spoon than pick up this item by mistake again, because it's a mystery item. Seriously though, all jokes aside, 90% of the time I would genuinely rather pick up Black Bean. Seriously. Even with skill issue aside, this item seems like it breaks more runs than makes them, and here's where my hot take comes in. I think that Ipecac either needs to get changed, or it should just be a quality 3 item. Now, put your pitchforks and torches away, because you haven't even heard what I have to say. First off, let's talk about item interactions, which is fitting because the only way this item can work is if it has positive item interactions, because it is just godforsaken otherwise, which we'll get to. Items like Brimstone, Pyromaniac, Mom's Knife, and Tech X all make Ipecac an amazing item, as each of their tier passives basically just override Ipecac completely, basically just makes it to where the tiers just do their normal effect with those respective items, except they also explode and do a flat plus 40 damage. So in those situations, it's only positives. But all of those items are quality 4. Yes, there are a few select synergies, like Ludovico technique, for example, where, yeah, you don't necessarily need a quality 4 item to make Ipecac work, but even then, it's really difficult, and it shouldn't be challenging. Quality 4 items are not meant to be challenging, and Ipecac is the epitome of challenging. To me, what makes a quality 4 item so amazing is that it almost guarantees a late game run, but if you don't find another quality 4 item or find one of these niche synergies, you're screwed. And basically, just as I drilled in, you need not 1 but 2 quality 4 items most of the time if you want Ipecac to work. Which is insane to me, because it's supposed to be a quality 4 item on its own, and pretty much every other quality 4 item, besides some ones you could be technical about like Cricket's Head, stand on their own as absolutely powerful without needing another quality 4 or without needing other synergies. You just become powerful. You pick up Brim and your run's just set, and sure, you'll probably find synergies, but it's a lot easier because it synergizes with so much more, whereas Ipecac has a pretty small selection and most of the items they synergize well with are quality 4. And as I already mentioned, some people are going to argue that there are good, cool synergies with Ipecac, and I'm not here to deny that, but whereas other quality 4 items almost always guarantee a juicy endgame run, Ipecac only seems to feel worse as you progress. Whether it's accidentally tapping your keyboard in womb and taking heart of damage for no reason, or it's getting bombarded by enemies like spiders and slugs that immediately close the distance, self-damage just feels completely inevitable with this item, and it's just incredibly frustrating to use most of the time. And don't get me wrong, I'm not the greatest Isaac player in the world, but I'd like to think I'm decent. Yet whenever this item lands within my greasy paws, I cannot stop taking damage. Between the tiny hitboxes that come out of nowhere and enemies that fly towards you at Mach speeds, it feels impossible to land safe hits with this item. It ultimately ends up feeling like a less controllable and worse DPS output version of Dr. Fetus, which brings me to the actual stats of this item. When you pick up Ipecac, you automatically get these stat changes. 1/3 fire rate, 0.8x range multiplier, so 80% of your normal range multiplier at all times, and a slower shot speed. But you do get a flat plus 40 damage and explosion effects in return. Also, you get a lingering poison effect. These seem relatively like inconsequential stats, like, oh, range, and fire rate is pretty usual for big damage outputters. Take Dr. Fetus for example, which only punishes you by half of your fire rate with damage multipliers that last until the endgame and even further buff at the endgame, whereas Ipecac has literally none of that. No multiplier, plus 40 flat damage, and it honestly makes other damage up effects feel super inconsequential unless it's something like Cricket's Head, which, like I already said, is another quality 4. So Let's say you get Mom's Ring, for example. What's a +1 damage up when you already got a 40 damage up and you're struggling just to not hit yourself? It is very frustrating. And while the +40 damage up seems really good early game, especially as a new player, it's just insane to see that stat raised by a flat 40. You will soon realize after playing Isaac for a while that a flat 40 damage up that doesn't scale for the endgame turns out to be pretty doo-doo water considering the effects that it has. But D6, you might say. +40 damage is +40 damage, just like $20 is $20. But you can't argue against the one feature that flushes this item down the toilet. The arc. The way Ipecac fires is insanely unintuitive because of the strange arc that the tier takes. It is really difficult to even guess where your shot will land, let alone consistently hit enemies in different directions. The only shot you have at hitting enemies is when you are aiming upwards or downwards, and this isn't even touching the range applications. God, don't get me started on the range applications. As the wiki reads, the height of the shots scale with range. At base stats, Ipecac shots won't be able to fly over obstacles, but the more range ups Isaac gets, the higher shots will be launched. Does anyone else see the issue with height in a top-down video game? Because I do. Gauging what height you have is absurdly difficult, and it feels more like you're praying to a mythical entity for your shot to land than having an actual understanding of where your tier should be landing. And apparently, every enemy in the game is infinitely tall because no matter how high your range is, the shot always lands right in front of enemies rather than on top of them, where you would intuitively think it would land. Now, some of you newer Isaac players may be kind of confused on what I mean here, but if you've ever used Ipecac, once you get higher range, sometimes your shots will just land way closer than you think because you look to the left and they're flying this huge arc that flies over rocks and items. But when you shoot at an enemy, if it's right in front of you, then it's always going to hit the shot. It does not matter how high your range is, your Ipecac shots will never fly over an enemy outright. Which is absurd because you've already created an issue by putting height in a top-down video game, but now you're going to say the height only applies in certain places? It makes zero sense. But hang on, let me calm down for a second, let me zen in, and let's talk about the endgame capabilities of this item. I've already mentioned it a few times, but let's actually break it down, because otherwise it's just a trust me bro. So, unless you find other items that multiply your damage, a +40 damage boost at the price of most of your tier rate does not scale well towards the endgame when compared to other quality 4 items. Even just doing the math, by the endgame, unless you have horrible luck, you're most likely going to hit a decently high tier rate of 4.7 to 5. And if you get a decent amount of damage up items and take the right deals, like I said, you can also have unlucky runs, but if you take the right deals, you should also be close to 10 damage on a lot of runs, especially if you're playing a character like Judas, where he can just pummel out damage pretty much no matter what because he has the Book of Belial. Some of my more mathematical listeners are going to already start seeing the issue here, where we're already coming out to around 50 damage per second that is easily aimable with a good shot speed, and Ipecac is sitting on 40-ish a second if you hit your shots and don't blow yourself up with your own tears. Do you see where the endgame issues come in here? And especially if you have an item like Cricket's Head, would you rather just have Cricket's Head and then something like Hemo, or would you rather have Cricket's Head with Ipecac? Because the answer for me is pretty simple. If you're still not convinced that this item has some serious downsides, even on the wiki notes it states that it's possible with low shot speed and high range / tier height, Isaac won't be able to hit obstacles up close with Ipecac shots. I know I'm not the only one who's gotten to this point. You get a high range with Ipecac and you realize you can't hit walls reliably anymore because your shot goes so unbelievably high, and so you lose all of the utility you originally had with Ipecac. Just let that sink in for a moment. One of the main primary benefits of having this item is being able to break things, and its greatest weakness in that facet is things being too close to you. Need I say more? It's completely unreal, and with all that being said, it should be pretty clear now why I think that Ipecac should be a quality 3 item, with its countless downsides for minimal functionality, and a half-decent damage boost at best. Tell me this, would you rather have Backstabber or Ipecac? How about Spoonbender? Blood of the Martyr? All better items because they don't have the negatives that Ipecac has, and they all have powerful boosts that synergize well. The problem with Ipecac is it tries to do both at the same time. It's a flat damage boost, but oh, it's meant to synergize with things, but it doesn't synergize with enough. And it's really unfortunate because it's a cool item with a cool concept, but unfortunately the execution just feels so awkward and misplaced in a game like Isaac. And Hemo would be an example of how a unique item that changes gameplay is done right. And there are a few other examples, but those require less skill. Hemo, I would say, mastering the arc feels a lot more rewarding because when you land a direct hit, you're rewarded with tons more damage. Whereas with Ipecac, if you don't land your hit, you're just done for. Hemolacria feels more like a shotgun where you land your shot, and even if it's a little off, the offshoot of bullets is still going to hit, or the offshoot of tears, excuse me. So with all that being said, it's pretty clear that I do not like Ipecac very much in its current state. But how can it be fixed? Because I know a lot of you are already freaking out the idea of its quality being lowered. Not that it's going to happen anyways, but I know a lot of you are going to go, well, it's plus 40 damage, there's no way that could be put in quality 3. But I honestly think it could, given all of its downsides and its very niche application. It's very specific, and I feel like enough people are aware of that, but I also feel like there's a lot of people who still have a soft spot for this item. So let's talk about how we could fix this. Well, first and foremost, it would be so much better if the item were just not to fire an arc. It doesn't make very much sense, whereas, as I said, not to bring up Hemo again, but it's very comparable here because it also, I think it's the only other quality 4 tier effect that makes your tiers have an arc. It is executed very well because of the little offshoot of tears afterwards, the spread. And like I said, it feels very much like a shotgun. You miss a shot by a little bit and you still get a lot of damage reward. And it's not completely punishing when you miss, whereas Ipecac very much is, and the damage output is pretty similar. So I suggest to take away the arc altogether. But I know a lot of you are not a fan of that, so it could still have a small arc at the end, or just a very small arc in general, but we need to fix the height somehow to make it not feel so awkward and unpredictable. The fact that height is based on range, and that height is even a factor at all in a top-down bullet hell is kind of insane to me. But even with that, there might be a way to do this right without it feeling overly awkward. I'm sure there are several modders who would be willing to make test mods for this and just see how it would feel otherwise. I just feel like since it hits enemies directly anyways, and when shooting at enemies it behaves like a normal tier, the fact that there's an arc in there just feels like an unnecessary added difficulty for an item that doesn't give that crazy of stats. So that actually brings me to my next point, which is that if you weren't going to fix the arc and have that added difficulty still, then maybe its stats should just be a little better. Obviously, a user-friendly experience would probably be more preferable in this situation, but like I said, I know many of you are already gathering your weapons for an uprising at the thought of changing some of the core features of Ipecac, which is fair because it's been around forever, and so we can respect that, but maybe we should buff the numbers a little bit. Instead of a flat plus 40 damage, maybe a damage scaling multiplier plus some flat amount, maybe plus 10, but then it damage scales with a multiplier of times 3 and then times 5 for the endgame. So then you're getting times 30 for a while, but then once you pass a certain amount of damage, the multiplier increases, and so you get this very like snowball effect. I feel like that would actually be really rewarding, and it gives you more incentive to play very careful with Ipecac, and then by the end game you maybe could be doing 300 damage in a shot, and you still feel very powerful, and you're actually rewarded for good gameplay. So Dr. Fetus kind of does this, except it's a little different, where the multiplier is based on your damage, but then once you surpass a certain amount of damage, it just adds a plus 30 flat to it no matter what, which isn't as strong, but Dr. Fetus is also a lot easier to use and has a lot more synergies. Here's an idea. Why don't we add more items for the Bob transformation? That still gives bomb immunity with some cool combinations, and it's kind of an ode to the Ipecac item in general, or rather, Ipecac is an ode to Bob. However, as the game currently stands, there's literally only 4 items, including Ipecac, that contribute towards the Bob transformation. It is easily one of the most niche weird transformations that people will rarely get. So I feel like it'd actually be very beneficial if you were to add some additional features and items to make the Bob transformation a little more manageable. Because 4 items is insane. Maybe a trinket like with the faded photo, I believe it's called. I'll put up the actual trinket on screen, but it's for the Guppy transformation. Anything to contribute to the Bob transformation, just to throw in the game, I feel like it wouldn't be hard or game breaking, and then Ipecac might have more of a chance of standing on its own with bomb immunity without being completely OP with having a quality 4 item like Pyro. So those are kind of my thoughts on passive buffs and the direct buffs. I'm sure some of you guys also have ideas. Maybe the tier rate should be a little less punishing. 1/3 feels very, very rough. Whereas with Dr. Fetus, it's only 1/2 for more damage and more control over your tiers, which is kind of crazy. And a lot more utility that's reliable. So just let me know what you all think for suggestions in the comments, because I'm super curious to see what the community thinks of this. So I'm not a game dev, and I didn't create the masterpiece that is the Binding of Isaac, so I don't expect any changes to be implemented because of this silly video, but I've had several annoying experiences with this item recently that have ruined otherwise good runs. One notably good Judas run was ruined altogether because of Ipecac and how little space I had to dodge for Mother. I had a crazy run going, tons of damage scaling, and I accidentally grabbed it as a mystery item because it was like a Curse of the Blind item, and I was so upset. And that's kind of what gave me the thought for this video is, should you be upset when picking up a quality 4 ever? Is that what that's meant to capture? Because I feel like no. And I started thinking about it, and there's probably not a single other quality 4 item that I would genuinely be upset about picking up. Unless it was a very, very niche situation. So, there's my yap session, completed. Yes, my feelings are hurt because my Judas to Mother run on hard mode was ruined. I'm a little upset. But seriously, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please hit the like button, it means a lot to me, and I put a lot of effort in these videos for you guys. As always, have a great day, night, or whatever period of 24 hours you're currently in, and love you guys. D6 out.